Good. All right. Hey there, folks. Since book tour and conventions are still on hold for a bit, I figured I'd bring book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster Season 3, Intriguing Interviews with Creative Minds. I can't believe we're here, but this is actually the last podcast of the season. So tonight I am thrilled to welcome one of my all-time favorite authors, Christopher Moore. Chris is the New York Times bestselling author of 17 novels, including Lamb, Fool, A Dirty Job, and Noir, and one of the most consistently hilarious authors of my lifetime. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, thanks.
Great to have you. Just a heads up to the folks at home, feel free to send me any notes or questions you have for Chris in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, let's gonna jump in, Chris. So let's start off. So where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Toledo, Ohio. I grew up in a couple of different little towns in Ohio, factory towns, and left there when I was 19. I've lived in California my whole adult life.
Okay, so just going back to Toledo, I have some friends out there, and I spent a little time out there. So I'm assuming you spent some time at Tony Paco's?
I did, yeah. Even if you don't live, we left Toledo to live when I was a kid, but my grandparents lived there for years. So yeah, we always visited Tony Paco's when we went back to the city.
Yep, have a couple of hoagies, and or is that what they call them out there?
Conies. Coney Islands.
That's it. Yeah. So were you a Mud Hens fan?
You know what? My Aunt Shirley lived across the street from Mud Hens Stadium.
Oh, did she really?
Yeah, so I played there with my cousins all the time. It never occurred to me. I mean, there was a baseball game going on,
right?
But you've got the attention span of a gnat when you're that age. So we've like chase each other under the bleachers and run out. Maybe buy some snacks. But it was, they didn't even charge local kids to get in. So,
oh, is that right?
Yeah, it was just a playground that a baseball game tended to be going on at the time.
Yeah. So were you a baseball fan?
Not so much. I mean, I watched the Indians, growing up, but I didn't play Little League like a lot of my friends did. So, and that really sort of cements you into it. I became a baseball fan in like 2010 in San Francisco.
Oh, sure, of course. So when you were in Ohio, so if you weren't like if you weren't a Little League kid, what was a day in the life for you as a kid? Were you like a troublemaker? Were you a reader? Like what was your thing?
I read a lot. I was an only child, and my dad read a lot. He had been in the Navy as a medical officer on a big heavy cruiser, and so he read incessantly, like a book a day, and he was a cop.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so he would go on his day off every week. He would go to the library, was part of his route, and he would come home with a stack of books, and then he would bring me a stack of books even before I was old enough to read. It would be picture books. So I grew up reading, and that was just my go-to thing to do. And I played outside and played sports and stuff, but consistently from the time I was a little kid, I read books and sort of escaped into books.
Okay, so back then when you were reading, was it sort of, you were an only child, but were you sort of, like a solitary bookworm, or did you have like a cast? Were your friends, were they readers too? Did you swap books? Like what was it like?
No, I don't think, not until I was in high school that I actually found other people that read books too. And we sort of, my best buddy in high school was into, Dracula and all that, pre-Stephen King stuff, all the Gothic stuff. But I think I just read as a entertainment. I just thought that's what you did because it was what was natural in our house, and that was augmented with Mad Magazine and all these, anything funny I could find.
Yeah, Mad Magazine. Wow, that's great. I had a subscription for a long time. I always loved the fold-ins at the back. And, and Spy versus Spy was my other favorite one.
I think I learned how to do satire from, by osmosis from reading Mad when I was a kid.
Sure. Wow. So your dad was in the Navy and then he became a cop. Was he a beat cop? Was he a detective?
Highway patrolman.
A patrolman. Okay.
A highway patrolman, yeah. And then he did that his whole life. He died on the job after I think he'd been doing it for 25 years. And I mean, he was running for the fitness thing and had a massive heart attack.
Oh, geez.
So he didn't get shot or anything. But yeah, that was my whole life as a kid growing up, was dad being a cop.
Did your mom work as well? Was she at home or?
No, she sold appliances at a department store. Okay. And so I was, as a littler kid up till about age 10, they sort of, after school, I went across the street. There was a family that a Catholic family that had like 6 kids. And so it was easy for them to throw another place at the dinner table for me.
Right.
And then my mom would come get me when she got off work at 7 or 8, you know.
So was your mom also your dad? Obviously, you're saying, big reader. Was your mom like that too? Did she encourage you?
Not so much. No, she wasn't. Just magazines and stuff. I don't know what my mom did for I probably took care of me. I don't know what she did for amusement other than take care of us.
Right. So your books are all steeped in humor, but you merge them in various genres: fantasy, history, religion, Shakespeare, noir, and supernatural elements such as monsters and vampires. So when you were reading, so you've had all this input. Did you have a go-to genre as a book reader, or did you kind of read a little bit of everything?
I think a little bit of everything. I started leaning towards science fiction and fantasy and horror about 5th grade, 6th grade, reading Jules Verne, and I would and there were just massive books for a 5th grader.
Right.
So I would check them out from the library and then renew them because I wouldn't be able to finish them in the 2 weeks or whatever. And then I think I discovered Ray Bradbury about that time, around 11 or 12.
Right.
And then I became aware of somebody writing the story for the first time, because his stories were so crafted and they were so, you kind of felt yourself being manipulated, but in a good way. So
Yep.
I think I started thinking about the writer as a person about that time, about 11 or 12. And I started writing little stories in school and
Right.
stuff.
So to different degrees, your books remind me of, there's a little bit of Vonnegut in there. This Tom Robbins comes to mind for sure. Even a touch of Douglas Adams. Were they influences on you, or were there other writers that sort of, you mentioned Bradbury. Were there anyone else that really kind
No,
of?
absolutely. Those 3 you mentioned, I mean, always were in the sort of the same sentence for me. And my, to give you an example, I think that you can't talk about Eddie Murphy without talking about Richard Pryor.
Right.
And I don't think if Tom Robbins and Kurt Vonnegut hadn't done what they'd done, I wouldn't have been published. I mean, I know for a fact when they did the editorial meeting for my my first book at St. Martin's, the editor told me that somebody at the meeting said, well, Tom Robbins' stuff is weird and we don't know what he does, and his stuff sells. So, it was sort of like, there's no doubt that those guys kicked the door open for me. And if you take the title of my first book, Practical Demon Keeping, that's a complete riff on the how-to version of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Right. Yeah.
The first time I saw The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I thought, is this a do-it-yourself book? What is this? But then, later on when I went to write my first book, I remember telling a friend of mine who was also a writer, I said, I want to do for horror what Douglas Adams did for science fiction. And so that was sort of my goal. So those guys were definitely influential on me in their own ways.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel in particular, Jitterbug Perfume, one of my favorite books.
My favorite of his too.
When I read your stuff, a lot of it, I'm often taken right back to that particular book. Just sort of the construction of the story, the humor, the kind of the weird blending of, the kind of the everyman with these fantastical elements. I feel it when I read it.
Yeah, I think I was really happy to hear that Tom Robbins somebody sent him an audiobook of Sacre Bleu. And he was an art critic before he wrote novels.
Is that right?
Yeah. So he knew all the paintings and stuff, and he has macular degeneration, so he can't read anymore. His vision is so bad.
Oh,
so he listened to Sacre Bleu, but his assistant wrote me and said, no, he loved it. He recognized all of it. And I think that probably owes more homage to Jitterbug Perfume than anything I've ever written, certainly.
Right. Oh, wow. That's great. What a compliment.
Yeah, it was really nice to hear.
Did you, were you a TV and movie kid back then too? Or were you kind of just?
Sure. I was raised, with television. I think we were maybe the second generation of TV kids. And,
right.
I have to say a lot of my doorway into my favorite books came from like the movie version of them. Yep. I think I saw The Mysterious Island on TV, when I was in like fourth grade. And then I
Right.
read all the Jules Verne books. And, that goes right up through my 20s when I saw the movie Cannery Row, and I got the book, and it has become my favorite book. But I don't know if I would have gotten there, through Mice and Men, which is what they give you in high school of Steinbeck, and it's miserable.
Cannery, was that Nolte?
No, well, yeah, the movie was
Yeah.
Deborah Winger and
Yeah.
Nick Nolte, and John Huston does the voiceover, which is a perfect voice for Steinbeck, that beautiful, forgiving voice that he has in his books.
For sure, for sure. So you studied at one point. You studied photography in college, correct?
Yeah.
So first of all, I have an uncle who's actually in the photography business. So first, how did you? Was that always a thing for you, photography?
No, not really. I wanted to be a writer, and I was brought up sort of always under the assumption that I was going to have to make my own way. And so anything that I would have the aspiration to do, my dad's answer was not, you can't do that. He wasn't discouraging in that way, but always, how are you going to make a living at that? And I knew enough about writing probably when I was 15, because I didn't want to be a journalist. I didn't want to write for a newspaper or magazines or anything like that. There was no half step. I was either going to have to publish fiction to make a living, and it was just, there was no way to do that like right out of high school or even right out of college. There was going to be some other method, but photography was a creative thing that you could do that had levels of,
Right.
in fiction, you're either there or you're not.
Right.
Whereas in photography, you could do, the portrait studio at Sears, or you could be working for National Geographic or Cosmo or somebody like that. Mm-hmm. And I had a friend who was a photographer and was, into Nikons and all that stuff. And he had studied with a Life magazine photographer, and had been taught. And so he sort of was my mentor, and I bought an old used Nikon and started taking pictures. And so that's when I went off to school, that's what I went off to learn, because there was just writing. I was good at it, but there's no, when you're 16 years old, there's no way I'm going to be a novelist that's going to work, with a working class family as a way to go,
Yeah. So do you still shoot photography today?
Yeah, I take pictures all the time. I mean, we all do, don't we?
Sure.
The cameras in our phones now are phenomenal,
Right.
compared to even 10 years ago. So yeah, I take pictures all the time. I mostly when I travel now, but one of my best friends is a National Geographic whale photographer, and
Did that influence you on Fluke?
Oh yeah, that's when I met him. That's when I met
Okay.
him. Yeah, Flip Nicklin was the National Geographic go-to guy for whales and marine mammals for 30 years. And
Okay.
I met him when I went to research that book, and he and his wife have spent Christmases with us,
how
4
cool.
or 5 times. Yeah, it's nice.
Oh, right on. So being a writer, there's a lot of process involved.
Right.
To sort of make the magic happen. Did you find, being in photography, was there anything that translated from, learning how to work the cameras and angles and light and daytime interiors, exteriors, and sort of learning the craft of photography? Did that translate to you in any way or influence you in any way in the way you write?
I think, one of the things when I went to Brooks Institute of Photography, and everybody who went there at that time was the best in their little town. It was sort of a self-assessment. So you just end up in this class of like 60 prima donnas. And the thing that really separated the people who were good and the people who were just technicians was if they had an eye. And I think that might have been something that I developed through photography, but it didn't translate. It just gave you the ability to see details that would give things meaning. And then when I started to write seriously, that's what I would focus on. And I made an effort to not take pictures. When I would research a book, I would not take a camera with me, because I wanted to remember those things that are vivid, so that when I wrote them, you would see the things that are vivid. and I would forget the background noise, you know. So photography probably, the writing probably fed into the photography more than vice versa.
Okay, I hear that. So, all right, so let's get into writing. So, you said you started writing when you were, an early teen, but when did you first, what would you consider to be the moment when you said, okay, I'm in this for real. I'm kind of a serious quote unquote writer. I'm there.
I think I had a teacher in high school who made us write for publication. In order to pass the class, you had to, get a rejection slip from a magazine. So I was put on that track early on, that if you were stepping into the arena, not with everybody in your creative writing class, but with the people who were making a living at it.
Right.
And I just, I went to California, I studied photography, I dropped out. I did a bunch of different jobs, selling insurance and so forth. And I was doing okay financially, but just very unhappy.
Yep.
And I write about being an insurance man in Coyote Blue, where you put on a face to meet a face, and and you kind of lose yourself, because it doesn't matter who you are, what you think.
Totally.
It just matters whether you're going to make a sale or not. So
Right.
And so I was sort of miserable, and I was kind of in this. I just crashed a relationship, and I was in this studio apartment in Goleta, California, and everything I owned I could see, from the bed. Yep. And I just went, well, what would I do? Why am I doing this? Because it just made me so unhappy. And I thought, well, I'm doing it for money. And I asked myself, well, what would you do if you had all the money in the world? And I thought, well, I'd travel, and then what? And then I'd write. And at that point, and I was like 25 at the time, I said, okay, I'm going to remove the contingency of having all the money in the world, and just go right to what I would do if I had all the money in the world. Right. And so that's when I had that moment where I'm like, okay, now I'm going to make a go of this. And it took me, 8 years before I published a book. It took me about, I think, 3 years. I published my first story and made like $160. Never saw a published copy of it because it was in some magazine, wasn't even available where I was. And then I sold my first book like 8 years later. So, but I had that, I was an adult when it snapped that, okay, I'm going to make a go of this.
Right.
And really, focus, my life on trying to do this. And obviously I worked full-time jobs and supported myself that whole time, doing other stuff.
Yep. So, all right. So I want to move into your books a little bit. So in particular, so You Suck and Bite Me, great titles, by the way, are books 2 and 3 in your vampire comedy love story trilogy. So when you wrote the first one, Blood-Sucking Fiends, did you always envision a trilogy, or when you wrote that first one, was it sort of, it was just one and done, and then who knows?
The first one, I didn't even plan on writing a vampire book. I thought I had sort of done, Demon Keeping had all this sort of alternative history, and Coyote Blue sort of resurrected this Native American trickster. And I thought that the vampire book, I thought that had already been done. And I sent a bunch of ideas in to my editor, because I had a 2-book contract at that point. And it was like 5 ideas. And one of them I really wanted to do was really fleshed out. And the vampire book was just like this throwaway thing that I had done a story on radio, because I had been a DJ in the late 80s. And I would just write stories and read on the radio.
Wait, hold on. Go back. Go back to the DJ thing. Go back to this. So where were you a DJ?
I was an alternative rock DJ in Cambria, California.
Really? And what
25? Go ahead.
What years were this?
87, 88, 89.
So alternative. I'm trying to think. So that was sort of like the Cure was out, or
you'd have The Cure, U2 starting at that point. Jane's Addiction is around. I had missed the whole new wave.
Yep.
The Depeche Mode and all that stuff. So I played that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I played ska because I had missed that stuff.
Okay.
Because I was playing being an adult in my early 20s, and I was seeing a woman who had a son who was 10, 11 years old. And so I pretended to be middle-aged when I was in my early 20s. And so by the time I was in my late 20s, you know, when I was reintroducing myself to music, I was sort of re-experiencing a lot of music that had come out in the 80s. And so there was, you know, English Beat and Fine Young Cannibals and that bunch of stuff. And then, and it was what I played was pretty eclectic. And we were one of the only 3 radio stations in the country that weren't programmed at that time. In other words, if you had a show there, you got to pick what you wanted to play.
Did you play any Butthole Surfers?
No, because I didn't like them. It wasn't, you know.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, funny. So wait, for how long did you do that? How long were you a DJ?
3 years.
3 years. Wow. Did you like it? Was it fun?
Oh yeah, it was great. I mean, it was like really crap money. I had like 4 jobs at the time.
Right.
I had 2 jobs waiting tables. I did paste up of the local newspaper on a Thursday, and I did drive time radio like 4 days a week, I think.
Wow. Okay. Fun. Oh, cool. Who knew? All right. So look, we got to talk about Lamb, the Gospel According to Biff, Christ's childhood pal, which I still count today as among my top 5 favorite books of all time.
Thank you.
So what was, and I actually bought a double copy. I had the first one. I beat it up from reading it. So I bought the leather-bound one that you put out some years ago, which I love. I have a whole Christopher Moore shelf on my personal collection. So no pun intended, but what was the genesis of that book?
That book was, there were 2 things involved, and I sometimes am reluctant to talk about making career moves, but you know, I had written 5 books and my career wasn't where I wanted it to be, right? Which was total world domination.
Sure.
And so I needed to swing for the fences, and I needed to write a big book, something that I wasn't sure I could do, that nobody in my mind had ever done. And I was reading The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov, a Russian writer. And it's sort of a weird magic realism thing, but there's a scene in it of the trial of Jesus, and Pontius Pilate has a migraine headache, and it's of course in Jerusalem, and it's very bright and hot, and he just wants this kid to go away. And I was reading that book, that scene, and because I had had a migraine, everybody I knew had had like one of those tension eye headaches, it made that scene that I had watched and read, you know, probably 1,000 times, so vivid. And I thought to myself, what if you could do this whole story this way? What if you could make this whole story as immediate and real as this one scene that Bulgakov had written? And so that was the start of it. And probably within a few days, I saw something on PBS, a special called From Jesus to Christ. And the narrator says, well, and it was, you know, sort of the historic Jesus-y thing. And he says, well, and actually there are 30 years in Christ's life that are not covered in the Gospels. And I thought, well, you know, somebody should write that. And I don't know anything about religion or history. I should be that somebody. And so that was the quote genesis of it.
Right. So did you get, I mean, at the time, did you get flack for it from the religious side of it, or? No,
I didn't. And as you can tell, having, you know, read the afterword, especially the first afterword, I really expected that. I really thought that it was going to be me and Salman Rushdie hiding in some safe house. Yeah. And when it came out, that wasn't the case at all. I mean, largely, I think because the publisher didn't print a lot of them. So it went way under the radar, and we were sending it to like Jimmy Swaggart and Falwell and you know, all those all those people, you know, can you believe this blasphemer, you know?
Right.
And hoping that they denounce it. Nobody did, you know. And I was like telling my friends in Ohio, you know, look, you guys, I'll buy the books if you'll burn them. You know, just go to the church and be, you know, and that didn't happen either. So. No, and it just sort of flew under the radar. And when I did hear from people of faith, they loved it. You know, they loved that it was real to them. And you know, by the time that leather version came out 5 years later, I mean, they were teaching it in seminary.
Were they really?
And I had seminary professors come into my book signings and, you know, in full vestments and stuff, which kind of freaked me out when they came through the door. Yeah, I spoke in front of the biggest Unitarian church in the world, had its own radio station and stuff like that. So it was
Really?
exactly the opposite of what every single person who reads that book thinks.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I mean, it's been a while since I've read it, but my experience is that it's not, it's not, yes, it's humorous, but it's not really an anti-religion book.
No,
It's
not
just,
at all.
it's really about, the relationship of this young man who, of course, it kind of goes on this goofy adventure, but it helps him become a fully
Yeah,
formed person.
yeah. He goes from being a little Jewish kid to being the Messiah.
Right.
And that was the idea of doing it. And it's a story about friendship.
Yeah,
It's
for sure.
its subtitle is, the gospel according to Biff, Christ's childhood fan.
Yeah.
And that was part of the structure of the book, was realizing I was going to write a comedy, and from the gospels, we had some idea of some of the things that Jesus had said, and he was not a laugh riot. So I had to invent a character who could be the funny guy, and who
Right.
could be the sort of whipping boy. And so, Biff becomes his childhood friend who gets written out of the Bible because he's a smartass.
Right. But it sort of makes sense to have a guy, this kid having someone who's got his back,
Right.
so it's good.
And that warms you to both of them,
Yeah.
and I looked at it as sort of, it was Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer.
Yep.
It was Bill and Ted. It was Butch and Sundance. It was this great pair of friends who sort of had each other's back.
Absolutely. I see that. Sure. So let's shift a little bit. So your Shakespearean set character Pocket has now appeared in 3 different books so far, starting with Fool, which I loved, by the way. You really seem to embrace this character. What is it about him that appeals to you?
Well, he's funny. He can, and he's brave, and he's clever. I have all the time in the world to think up clever things for Pocket to say.
Right.
But when
And
he
just
says them,
for those who don't know Pocket, so Chris, just give us a 30-second overview.
Pocket he was originally a riff on the Fool from King Lear. Fool is Shakespeare's King Lear, written from the point of view of the Fool, who is gone after Act 1 in the play. But in here, he's the least powerful character among all these royals, all these princesses and dukes and earls. And yet he's sort of running the show, and he's physically diminutive. He's a little guy, like a jockey kind of guy. And so I basically just gave him the stage, and he's the all licensed fool. He's the only one who can speak truth to power.
Yep.
And he does, and he just, as the Brits say, takes the piss out of everybody. And that's what I like about him, is he's clever, he's funny, he's brave, he's sort of almost insanely fearless when he's in the face of all.
He really was. And this is at a time in world history where, like, when they say we're going to lock you in the dungeon, you were like in an actual dungeon.
Yeah. And they do, through the course of the books, he opens up the Serpent of Venice. He's being locked in a dungeon to drown.
He's chained to the wall, right? And it's flooding, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's great stuff. Okay, so quick interlude for the folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for Chris, send them in the chat box, and we'll get to a few at the end of the show. All right, Chris, so I've seen you in person a few times in New York City at book signings, and each time, you held court, and I think you're hilarious. And I've told my wife this before. I always felt that you should do stand-up or host your own show. Did something like that ever occur to you? Was that ever an option for you?
I think that's very flattering, but and I hear that from my readers who come to the event. But here's the thing, Russ, the bar's really low. I mean, if you've been to many book signings, yes, it's really kind of like, oh my God, I've got to get through this reading, And I learned really early on to not do that.
Right. I remember you saying that very early. You say, I don't do readings. You just talk.
Yeah. And so over a period of a month, which I'm on, how long I'm on book tour, I get to work some material. Right. If I was a professional, if I was a comedian, I would take a year to work that material. But I get, it gets significantly better at the end of the month. And the poor people in San Francisco always get just this horrible throwing spaghetti at the wall thing that I do. It hasn't been an opportunity, but I'm not sure that I could walk into a club where they say, okay, here's a funny guy, and it would work to a bunch of strangers. It
True.
works because you guys are like, I like his book. He made me laugh in my bathtub. I'm kindly disposed toward him. And so I can go on and kill
We're pre-sold.
among my friends, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, fair enough. It's just I know I have, because I've seen you do a couple of signings, and every time, to me anyway, it was just a great experience. It kind of felt like, sometimes when you watch someone, you've been to all sorts of, you've seen other people do signings and talks and whatever, and most of them are just whatever they are. But to me, seeing you at kind of doing your thing always has stood out. Of all that I've done, they're always one of the highlights of my.
That's nice of you to say, but I figure if someone's taking the time to come out to see my dumb ass,
right,
and they're going to spend money for a hardcover book and then stand in line,
sure.
I got to bring something.
Yeah.
The books are, and like I said, and it's funny. What's great about writing funny books is the people at the bookstores tell me this all the time. Like, I'll walk in and the crowd will already be there, and they'll go, "Your people are so nice," and I go, "That's it. I made them laugh in bed. I've made them laugh in their bathtub. We're friends already."
Right.
Haven't met, so it's always nice for me because I walk into a room that's got 300 people who like me. That's a great job.
That is a great job for sure. We should all have that job. So a quick question I wanted to ask you. So many of your books are set in San Francisco, not all of them, but a lot of them are. I know you live there, but it's more than just, at least to me anyway, that it's just a setting. In your books, I find that the city itself is a character. Is that how, do you approach it that way?
I kind of do. I kind of do it. I'm always learning new stuff, from living here, and I'm like, well, I want to write about that, And then early on, before I lived here, I wrote, I think, Bloodsucking Fiends, You Suck, A Dirty Job. I wrote all set in San Francisco. I wrote before I lived here. Now I did come to the city for each of those books, and I
Oh, is
lived.
that right? So I didn't realize. I thought you had already were in this, because the way it comes across, it felt very lived in.
No, well, I did come to the city. I spent a lot of time walking the streets and looking at stuff and listening to people, eavesdropping. I would go down to the financial district at lunchtime and just like get a table, one of the outdoor places, and then just sit and listen to the secretaries talk about their bosses and stuff like that. And that's where you get, my character Jody in Bloodsucking Fiends is, she works at Transamerica, and sort of her point of view and her sort of serial monogamy and stuff like that is part of what I heard at, eavesdropping on these women having lunch. Right, later on, when I start to write the vampire books and I start bringing in the goth character, a lot of the way she is being riding the buses and listening to like these young Asian girls who are all gothed out and super caffeinated and talking a million miles an hour, and that's how Abby Normal becomes a character. So
great.
I mean, I don't know if I think of it as the city as a character, but it definitely has a personality.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. So, Chris, you've got some new books. You've got some stuff for us. I'm going to share my screen, and then you can show everyone what we got going on here. Bear with me one moment, and I will do this. Let's do a little this. Here we go. Okay. Can we? All right. So what do we got here?
Squirrel. Shakespeare for Squirrels is my latest one. I think the paperback comes out next month, April. You can still get the hardcover. That is a real squirrel that was at my house in Cambria. And turns out he'll do anything if you just put nuts out for him. So I took that picture. And that's the third book in Pocket the Fool's series. And it's based on A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Okay, so is it just basically a retelling, or what's the
kind of a retelling? Yeah, I mean, and I add a lot of elements, but it's basically once again Pocket is set adrift with his giant apprentice named Drool, and they wash up on the shores of Greece, and they're rescued by this, let's say, young woman named Cobweb. And he just is sort of sucked into the whole story that we know as A Midsummer Night's Dream, and you know, obviously I twist it and make it funny and add some things to it too,
Right.
including lots of squirrels. And
Right.
so that's the latest one that's been finished.
Right. Okay. And then this one, and what do we got here?
That was the book before, Noir, and it's the reason I sent that to you, Russ, is my friend Donna, who is selling first editions. And if you go to my Twitter feed, which is at the author guy, the pinned tweet, you can order first editions of Noir that are signed for like $24 post-paid, which is a smoking deal. And they come with a little signed Moon Man. I have a bag of Moon Man here. I'll show you.
Hang on, I'm gonna. I got it. Hold on. I got to X out.
Okay. Well, we'll just say anyway. So there he is. He's one of those guys. They glow in the dark. And I signed him on the top of his head. Anyway, each one of those comes with those. If you want one, they're $24, and all of it goes to support my friends who can't work because of COVID. So it's going to probably be coming to an end in the next month or so if everybody gets vaccinated and we're all out in the world again.
Yeah. So 2 questions before we go. First, about Noir. So was that, it's set in the, remember the 40s or the 50s?
Late 40s. Yeah.
Right? And, you're starting off, obviously they're coming in off the docks. Was that inspired at all by your dad?
Oh yeah, a little bit. Yeah, sure. In fact, there was a book that I wrote, my San Francisco book before that was called Secondhand Souls. And one of the characters is a painter on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yep.
And when my dad was in the Navy, his ship came to San Francisco, and he walked across the Golden Gate Bridge early in the morning, and he met one of the painters there and chatted with him. And he was a kid, he was probably 18 or 19, right. And he talked about it all the time. So it was really a cool thing for me to be able to write about one of the painters on the Golden Gate Bridge, because my dad, this Ohio kid who was, out, fighting in the Korean War and so forth, saw that. And so yeah, that it had some influence on it. And the guy, the main character of Noir, it takes place in 1947, it's just after the war, but he has been in the city for a number of years. And he walks with a limp, and the reason is the day before Pearl Harbor, he gets in a forklift accident, and a forklift scissors his foot against a wall and breaks his foot really bad, and he almost has to have it amputated. And so he can't go in the service, and he tries. Right. And even after he gets, he heals up, even the Navy won't take him. That's how he ends up in San Francisco. And that was my father's story in being a highway patrolman. He had come out of the Navy, and he was working at a factory in Toledo, Libby Owens Glass, which is a Ford company. And somebody ran over his foot, scissored his foot against a wall with a forklift, and they wanted to amputate it. And as they're taking him into surgery, he's telling his mother, "Don't let him amputate my foot," because he was set up to go to highway patrol school, to the academy. And so he ended up being, they didn't cut off his foot, and he was able to go to and become a highway patrolman. But like his footprint he had no arch. Like he looked like Neanderthal footprints or Bigfoot footprints, because it was just this big flat foot.
So
and so forth.
Like they say about cops, he really was a flat foot.
Yeah. And yeah, it was a good thing he drove for a living and didn't have to walk. Mm-hmm. But that sort of was, having Sammy have that same injury and not be able to go fight in World War II was sort of the backstory of much of Noir.
So we talked about a little bit before we got on, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but we were talking about, kind of, you said, COVID's almost over. What's it been like, as a writer, we're creative folks. We have to call upon our thoughts, our feelings, and we're trying to put it on page. How did that go for you in the last year?
It's been tough. I mean, and I, in saying that, I completely understand the privilege of, the fact that I was able to, buy food and pay rent and all that. But getting it on the page has been tough. And, you always think that, man, the perfect situation. I have to be at home and can't go anywhere. I should be able to, I'm not going to be distracted. I'm going to, write a ton. But I think the ongoing habitual fury at the Trump administration that I'd had for 4 years, combined with this sort of despair of COVID, I just wasn't able to get anything down. My stuff has to be funny.
Right.
And I just wasn't feeling funny, and I've often said, if my books didn't have to be funny, I could probably write them a lot faster.
Sure.
And I got mad. I read that Stephen King book on writing, and he said there's no novel that can't be written in 2 months, right. Which is like Usain Bolt saying there's no 100 meters that can't be run in under 10 seconds. It's like, right. Yeah, blow me. But the thing I wanted to say is, Big Steve, which is your funniest book? Right. Because if I just wrote my plot, which any of my books would work without it being funny, I could probably do them in a couple of months, but I can't. And so anyway, it was tough for me. And virtually every pro I know has said the same thing. It's just been like pulling teeth. Yeah. And you feel horrible because you don't have an excuse. Right. That part of you that's always said, don't be a wuss. Right. There's no such thing as writer's block. That's for wusses. Doesn't matter.
Look, it's hard, but thank God the tide is turning, and yeah. there's a lot of light at the end of this tunnel. So thank God. All right, Chris, that was great. But now it's time for a special segment on the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 categories. Wherever it lands is what you get. And I picked some categories just for you. And the categories are Hello Earthlings, Stranger in a Strange Land, Holy Fuck Stockings, Music Lever, Kick 'em in the Junk, Fear of Flying, and Creature Feature. You ready?
What am I supposed to do?
No, I spin. Whatever you get is what you get. You ready?
Okay, spin.
All right, you got Hello Earthlings. Okay, so the category is, where are we? Sorry. Okay, an advanced race of aliens have landed on the Earth. They haven't made up their minds what they think about us yet. You have been chosen as our ambassador. What's the first thing you say to them?
Sup, my aliens?
Okay, we're in trouble. Okay, Chris. All right. So
I didn't say you should give me that job. You just gave me that job.
That's right. Hey, look, that's what happens when you spin the wheel, right? All right. So, Chris, you and I are both in the writing business. So let's go to our advice column. What's the best and the worst advice anyone has ever given you about writing or being a writer?
The best advice probably was don't rewrite until you're done writing. In other words, do a first draft all the way through and then go back and rewrite, because otherwise you'll never finish anything. And I found that to be true by trying to not do that. So that's the best advice. The worst advice, I had a good writer teach saying you have to get out of your writing. In other words, get out, don't be there. Don't be a presence in your writing. And in other words, don't show off. Mm-hmm. And my answer is, why do it? The entire point of it is to show off. Right, that's right. For me, it's right. Like, so those are the best. For me personally, those are the best and worst.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Chris. So now we're going to discuss how I love you and I hate you. As writers, when we put our work and ourselves out there, criticism of all kinds comes with it. The reviewers love you or they hate you, and sometimes they're indifferent. How do you feel about reviews? Do you take them to heart? Do you let them roll off you? Do some stick with you more than others?
I've been really, really fortunate in the last few years, and knock on Naugahyde, that all of my editorial reviews have been good. All the newspaper, magazine, website stuff has been good. I don't read my Amazon reviews or Goodreads reviews because I do take them to heart. And that's not going to help my work. I early on, I remember I got a review. I mean, this is how much it sticks with you. I got a not great review. It wasn't a bad review. My editor was like, and this happens occasionally. It's like, you got this great review from so-and-so, you know, and I read it and I go, what's great about that? Because they can say 50 great things about the book, but if they say one thing that they didn't like, that's all you heard.
Yep.
And I got a review from the Boston Herald, I guess, and they said something about a character that I'd written, and it affected me. I changed the next book I was going to write based on what that review said. So, and I don't think it was an unfair review of the character. It said that she was sort of a cliche California blonde, but I had sort of based her on somebody I knew. So it was like, well, yeah. And then you learn very quickly, you know, as a writer, the truth does not help you.
No,
there's no defense for like, but it's true. And it's like, doesn't matter.
Right. No, you're so right. The truth is not your friend.
No, the truth does not help you out. If it's a boring story, then it's your obligation to throw the truth out the window. Right. So that's, but the Amazon reviews, the consumer reviews, they're really, really hugely not helpful, you know, and, you know, the 5-star reviews, it's going to be like, why did you really like this? Which is what you want to hear. Right. I mean, I love a rave review, but when I'm on book tour, and that's when all the reviews are coming out editorially, I tell my PR person who sort of has their Nexus, LexisNexis search on, you know, or their Google alert, so that anything in my name appears on, they get. Yep. And they'll go, well, you've got a new review in the Houston Chronicle, and I'm like, is it good? And they're like, yeah. And I go, okay, then you can send it. But if it's not really good, I don't want to know it existed. Right. I don't need that to undermine my confidence, you know. Right. I got to go out and talk to 300 people tonight, you know.
It's funny because I've been asking this question more and more, and you know, I get a diversity of responses. I've had some guys that are like, I don't care. When people say that, when authors say that, do you think they really mean it, or do you think they're just saying it to say it, or do you think they actually don't care?
I don't know. I mean, I know a couple of crime writers who will say, I'm just doing this for money. You know, it's as if they're making an excuse that, you know, I could be a better writer, I could write better books, but I'm writing this because I get paid a lot of money. And the people I've heard say that get paid a lot of money. Right. So, you know, I would guess that maybe they don't care, you know. I think maybe they, you know, they get reinforcement from their fellow crime writers, you know, and that can be a little bit of a, you know, they have their ButcherCon every year, and they're a bit of a gang, you know.
The checks probably help.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, wow, I've just moved into my Italian villa. I'm really sorry that, you know,
you didn't like,
you know, that Buddha 975 on Amazon didn't like my book. Right. And I know one guy who just it has made an insane amount of money writing, and I've never seen a good review of any of his books ever. Right. You know, and I don't want to say the name because he's also been very kind to me, and I don't want to diss him at all. But I can't get through one of his books, you know, and they're just god awful. And every critic that's ever picked one up, and you know, I'm not his readers love him, but every, you know, professional newspaper fiction critic hates it, and you know, all the, you know, the Kirkus and Publishers Weekly hate him. Every book that comes out, and he still sells like 10 million copies, and you know, has bought an entire state, you know.
Well, good for him, I guess. Yeah. All right, this is great. We've got a few minutes left, so we're going to take some questions from the audience. One that's come in. So Chris, any offers? I know you've talked about this in the past, but any offers to make your books into films, TV shows? And if you had a choice, what books would you like to see turned into films?
Well, yeah, probably most people know this, that almost all my books have been optioned or bought at some time or another. Some of them many times. I think Coyote Blue's been optioned like 9 times. And Dirty Job's been with like 6 different companies, you know. And you know, for the people who they throw that term option around. Option is like rent to own.
Right.
You know, they option it for like 2 years, which gives them a chance to see whether they can get a movie made or not. And then if they don't, you get it back. Now, when they buy it outright, it's theirs forever. And that's happened with a couple of my books. I'd love to see a Dirty Job that made into a film or a series. And some really talented people have started with it and then have not gotten anywhere. I wouldn't mind seeing Lamb as a series, but I hope, you know, I like to put, but a good one,
Yeah.
you know, because there are books that you think your whole life, that'd be such a great movie. And they make a movie and you go, oh my God, I wish they hadn't done that.
Right.
And Tom Robbins is, you know, after they made Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, everybody went, let's not do that to any more of his books, you know?
Yeah.
Carl Hyacin, Striptease. It's like, let's not do that to any more of Carl's books. And so, you know, I don't want that to happen, but I'd love to see Lamb as a series, like a 10-part series on HBO or Netflix or something. And Dirty Job, I think, would either make a good movie or a good series.
Sure.
The Pocket books would make a cool series if you got people who had chops, you know, people who are better at writing scripts than I am, you know.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about that. So if I recall correctly, it was maybe 10 years ago, maybe I'm getting the timeline wrong. You took, was it Fool? You did like a Shakespearean tour of the book?
We did a few scenes from it with the Shakespeare Theater of New Jersey. And I know that sounds funny. It's like, oh, those guys who have.
Hey, I'm in Jersey right now, so.
Yeah. But most of them are New York actors and people that you've seen a million times on TV and really talented people. And they adapted, a guy named Joe Disher, who was the creative director there at the time, adapted a bunch of scenes from Fool, and they performed them. And they would do the scene from King Lear, and then they would do the scene from Fool. And it was a great experience for me. I had never worked with theater at all, and you know, just doing a couple read-throughs with the actors before they did the stage reading, it got so much better. You know, and I never had that experience. It's like, you know, however it leaves my house is how it is, you know.
Right.
And here I was, you know, having all these other creative, talented people adding to it and making it better. And it was such a great experience. And I have a friend who I think is adapting Fool into a play. I tried it myself and I sort of face planted on it. I just I don't have the sense of the beats, I think, for writing for the theater, at least not my own stuff.
Were any of those performances filmed? Do they live somewhere?
No, they're not. There's nowhere you can see them. There may be audio somewhere, but I had the audio and it was really bad quality.
No.
Otherwise, I would have posted it a long time ago.
All right, Chris. So we talked about your new books. So, you know, where can we get them? I'm assuming the usual channels. And what's next for you?
I'm writing a sequel to Noir.
Noir. Oh, very.
I don't have a title for it yet. So Noir 2.
Noir 2.
But I like those characters. I like the period. I like the city, and it's something starting to make a turn. I had a good day today, so you know, fingers crossed. And I don't know when that'll be out. You know, it's going to be obviously it's not finished, so I would say 2 years before we're going to see it. And there's a number of my things that are sort of actively in development for film and television and could fall out tomorrow. They've done it before. Right. And so I don't really talk about that because I think it's bullshit, to be honest with you. You know, it's like, I've got some news, but I can't talk about it yet. And it's no, when I can talk about it, it's a real thing. So.
All right, fair enough. All right, that's great. So Chris, so that was great, Chris. So as for me, folks, as we're wrapping up, I'm going to do a little 2 seconds on what I got for you. All right, so since if fantasy, humor fantasy is your thing, and I'm assuming it is, if you've been here, I'll encourage you to check out my own sci-fi fantasy backpacking trilogy, which encompasses Finders Keepers, Genius de Milo, and Astropalooza. The 3 Finders Keepers it's loosely based on a series of backpacking trips that I actually took through Europe and New Zealand, set against a quest for a jar, which you can see Theo holding right there, containing the universe's DNA. Kind of think Bill and Ted meets Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And Finders Keepers are 2 bumbling backpackers. That's New Yorker Jason Medley, actually based on me, and New Zealander Theo Barnes are running around Europe, and their big worry is, can I get the girl? Can I make my train to Amsterdam? I'm hungover again. Meanwhile, the fate of the universe is hanging in the balance, and they don't know it, but as the reader, you do. So you're in on the joke, and they're not. From there, the stakes escalate into Genius de Milo, and then finally, with the fate of all existence at stake by the time we get to Astropalooza. In that book, our backpacking heroes must somehow prevent these two energy waves from crashing into each other in space, which would initiate the next Big Bang, thus eradicating the universe and everything in it. And throughout the series, they interact with a motley crew of characters, both from Earth and the cosmos, kind of hunting them down to steal the thing that they don't even know that they possess. Okay, so that's pretty much it for me. You can get them on Amazon and published from Crazy 8 Press, or you can actually buy them a signed copy from me if you are so inclined. All right, Chris, this was a great show. I want to thank you for coming on, for spending some time with us.
Thanks for having me, Russ. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. And I want to thank everyone who's watching. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro. I'll be taking a week off to regroup, and then I'll be back April 14th with season 4. So to everyone, I hope everyone's safe, everyone's healthy, get your shots, and hopefully we'll be back out on book tour and we can meet face-to-face again soon enough. Thanks a lot, everyone. And I hope you have
Bye, everybody. Bye. Goodbye.
Take care.